Good afternoon. Welcome to Kenya News Update today. I'm your host. We begin with a global economic story that touches every consumer, every household, every wallet. Consumer prices rose 2.4% annually in February, exactly as economists had forecast. This headline number from the United States is a critical barometer for the world economy, signaling that inflation remains stubbornly above the Federal Reserve's 2% target. But what does this mean for you, the consumer, here in Kenya and across the globe? And how does this economic data connect to other pressing global issues, from environmental disasters to tragic human events? We'll dive deep over the next 12 minutes. First, let's unpack that inflation figure. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, is the most widely watched measure of inflation. It tracks the average change over time in the prices paid by urban consumers for a market basket of consumer goods and services. In February, that basket cost 2.4% more than it did a year ago. That rate was unchanged from January, indicating inflation is holding steady, not accelerating. But the devil, as always, is in the details. When we strip out the volatile categories of food and energy to get the core CPI, we see a monthly increase of 0.2% and an annual rate of 2.5%. Both were precisely in line with market expectations. This suggests underlying price pressures are persistent. Now, let's visualize that key threshold. The Federal Reserve, America's central bank, has a clear mandate to maintain price stability, which it defines as inflation averaging 2% over the long run. The current reading of 2.4% is, therefore, a full 0.4 percentage points above that target. To put this in perspective, for a household spending 50,000 shillings per month, that extra 0.4% represents an additional 200 shillings in costs over a year, just from being above the target. But the overall story is one of mixed signals within the economy. Prices for services and shelter, which are often stickier and harder to bring down, continued to rise modestly. However, several goods categories provided some relief. Used car and truck prices fell by 0.5% in February. Auto insurance, a major expense for many, saw a welcome decline of 0.1%. Apparel prices were down 0.3%. And medical care commodities, which include prescription drugs, dropped by 1.3%. This divergence tells a complex story of an economy where some inflationary pressures are easing while others remain firmly entrenched. For the average consumer, this creates a confusing landscape. As President John F. Kennedy told the U.S. Congress on March 15, 1962, consumers by definition include us all. He was advocating for a consumer bill of rights. Today, the right to stable prices feels paramount. When inflation runs hot, it erodes purchasing power. Your shilling, your dollar, your euro simply doesn't stretch as far. This is why central banks like the Fed are so focused on these numbers. Their decisions on interest rates made in Washington, D.C., ripple out to affect borrowing costs worldwide, from mortgages in Nairobi to business loans in Mombasa. The current data presents a dilemma. With inflation above target but not getting worse, the Fed must decide whether to hold rates steady, risking entrenched inflation, or hike again, risking a slowdown in economic growth. This balancing act has global consequences. Now, let's shift our perspective from the macroeconomic to the devastatingly human. While economists debate decimal points, a court in Mombasa is grappling with a tragedy of unimaginable scale. On February 19, 2026, Enos Amanya, alias Hallelujah, appeared before Chief Magistrate Alex Ithuku. He pleaded guilty to 43 charges of manslaughter related to the Shakahola massacre. But in a chilling revelation last Thursday, Amanya told the court the death toll was far higher. He confessed to being part of a security team that supervised burials and stated that more than 900 people died in the tragedy. He described the method with horrifying clarity, saying, "We tied their hands, legs, and let them die." This admission transforms Shakahola from a mass tragedy into one of the worst peacetime atrocities in Kenya's history. The scale is almost incomprehensible. 900 lives lost. Each one a consumer, a family member, a person with hopes and needs now gone. The legal process is just beginning, but the search for answers and accountability must continue with urgency. This story is a stark reminder that behind every statistic, there are human beings. From the economic data that shapes our daily budgets to the court testimony that reveals profound suffering, the connection is the individual, the consumer, the citizen. Now, we turn to another global story where human activity and environmental neglect create a toxic legacy. Across the world, at mining sites from Africa to South America, thousands of dams hold back poisonous waste known as tailings. These dams are meant to last forever. But in our era of climate change, forever is a promise that is increasingly hard to keep. Extreme weather events, more intense rainfall, severe flooding, are making these structures unstable. The result is a toxic time bomb waiting to go off. We saw a devastating example in February 2025. In Zambia's Copperbelt, a tailings dam barrier broke. A catastrophic flood of poison was unleashed into the Chambishi Stream, a tributary of the Kafue River, Zambia's longest waterway. The volume was staggering, more than 50 million cubic liters of acidic water and heavy metals like copper and cobalt poured into the ecosystem. The immediate impact was death for the river. Fish, plants, and microorganisms were wiped out, but the long-term consequences for human consumers are profound. The Kafue River is a vital source of water for drinking, agriculture, and fishing for communities downstream. Heavy metal contamination can persist for decades, entering the food chain and causing severe health problems, including neurological damage and cancer. This is not an isolated incident. There are an estimated 3,600 tailings dams worldwide, and many are in areas increasingly vulnerable to extreme weather. The risk they pose is not just environmental, it's a direct threat to human health and economic stability. When a river dies, the communities that depend on it suffer. Their ability to be consumers, to buy food, to access clean water, to live healthy lives, is fundamentally compromised. So, what connects these three stories? On the surface, they seem disparate: inflation data, a court confession, and an environmental disaster. But they are all at their core about security. Economic security, personal security, and environmental security. They are about the systems that are meant to protect us: central banks, courts, and engineering standards, and what happens when those systems are stressed, fail, or are deliberately subverted. For the consumer, security means predictability. It means knowing that the price of bread won't double next month. It means trusting that spiritual leaders will protect, not harm, their followers. It means believing that the water from your tap won't make your family sick. When any of these securities break down, the social contract phrase. Let's delve deeper into the inflation narrative with a global perspective. The United States is not alone in its fight against rising prices. Central banks, from the European Central Bank to the Bank of England, have been engaged in a similar battle. The global effort to tighten monetary policy has had mixed results. In some regions, inflation has fallen back to target. In others, like the US, it remains elevated. This divergence creates challenges for global trade and investment. A strong US dollar, bolstered by relatively high interest rates, makes imports more expensive for countries like Kenya, potentially importing inflation through costlier fuel and machinery. Conversely, it makes Kenyan exports cheaper for American buyers, which could be a boost for sectors like agriculture and horticulture. The interconnectedness is total. Now, consider the resource dimension. The toxic spill in Zambia involves copper and cobalt. These are critical minerals for the global green energy transition. They are used in electric vehicle batteries, solar panels, and wind turbines. The demand for these minerals is skyrocketing as the world tries to move away from fossil fuels. But incidents like the Chambishi spill expose the dark side of this transition. If the mining that provides these essential materials destroys local environments and poisons water supplies, can we truly call it sustainable? The consumer buying an electric car to reduce their carbon footprint may be unintentionally linked to an environmental catastrophe thousands of miles away. This is the complex ethical landscape of the modern global economy. We are all consumers in a vast, interconnected web. Our choices, the policies of our governments, and the actions of corporations all ripple outward. The inflation number, 2.4%, is a snapshot of one part of that web. It reflects supply chains, labor markets, energy costs, and corporate pricing decisions from around the world. It is influenced by conflicts, by climate events, and by technological breakthroughs. To understand it fully, we must look beyond the headline. We must ask, why are service prices still rising? It could be due to strong wage growth in sectors like healthcare and hospitality, which is good for workers but puts upward pressure on costs. Why are goods prices falling? Improved global supply chains and a normalization of demand after the pandemic boom could be key factors. This granular understanding is crucial for policymakers. For the Federal Reserve under the current administration of President Donald Trump, the data presents a nuanced picture. The Fed operates independently, but its actions are watched closely by the White House. With an election year on the horizon in the US, the political desire for lower interest rates to stimulate the economy will be strong. But the Fed's mandate is clear: price stability first. If inflation remains above 2%, their hands may be tied. This tension between political and economic imperatives is a story playing out in many capitals. In Kenya, under President William Ruto's administration, the focus is on lowering the cost of living. While U.S. inflation is at 2.4%, Kenya's rate has been significantly higher, though it has been trending downward. The government's efforts to subsidize agriculture, stabilize fuel prices, and manage debt are all aimed at providing economic security for the Kenyan consumer. The challenge is immense, but the goal is the same as that articulated by Kennedy over 60 years ago: to protect the rights and well-being of the consumer. As we conclude, let's reflect on the through line. The Shakahola tragedy is a horrific failure of consumer protection in the most profound sense, the protection of life itself. Those followers were consumers of a doctrine, and that transaction ended in betrayal and death. The legal system, another pillar of consumer security, is now responding. The mining disaster in Zambia is a failure of environmental and engineering safeguards. It represents a broken promise to downstream consumers who rely on a clean river. The inflation data, while seemingly benign, represents the ongoing struggle to deliver on the promise of economic security. All three stories highlight the fragility of the systems we rely on and the constant vigilance required to maintain them. They remind us that data points like 2.4% are not abstract. They are felt in the market, in the courtroom, and in the environment. They shape our world in tangible ways. For us, the consumers, staying informed is our first line of defense. Understanding these connections empowers us to make better choices, to demand better accountability, and to build a more secure future for all. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, this is Kenya News Update Today. Subscribe to Kenya News Update Today.